Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignite Your Heart Masterclass. We are going to be here today with the one and only Lisa Holt. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Something about your smile always makes me smile, so I'm delighted to have you. And please give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Lisa Holt, and I'm a certified relationship coach and spiritual counselor. And I just am thrilled to be able to be here and share some of the insights that I have experienced in my own relationship, as well as how I translate that with clients.
I love this conversation because something in your world is beginning to shift and you shifted from working with singles to now couples and seeing that play out in your own relationship. So I want to hear a little bit about like what is happening in your world, what is going on, and what are you seeing in your practice nowadays?
Yeah, I started coaching in 2018, and really it was a transition from personal training because my own journey was through fitness. I always say my awakening came through fitness. And so initially that was the way that I could translate that was to become a personal trainer. And what had happened was some of my clients started to rely more on me as more of a life coach. And being a hairstylist in my previous life, I really leaned into that. And so it started to become this avenue where I was coaching singles, and they were asking me about my relationship and how I met my husband, and because I was on social media. And so I started coaching single women and how they would navigate dating. And what started to happen is a lot of those single women started dating, and then they got engaged. And I'm along the process with them. So then when the partner came into the picture, it sort of segued into relationship coaching. And so I've just been growing into that role as my clients grow, as I grow. And it's just been a beautiful thing. So I still coach singles, but I've also been infusing couples as well, and it has been so powerful.
Tell me a little bit about your background. If I remember correctly, you said you were avoidant, but I'm not going to steal words out of your mouth. Like, I want to hear a little bit about your background and your struggle in love and then what changed.
Yeah, so that's part of how women were coming to me to work with me as a coach, because I led for many years with this concept that I was an independent single woman, didn't need a man. And then all of a sudden, I met this guy who who is now my husband. And what was happening is women who were following me on social media all of a sudden were going, "I thought you were Miss Single Independent, didn't need a man." And I was like, "Yeah, right?" And I had I had a mentor who said to me one day, she said, "You know what? You're just avoidant." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Avoidant. and and I was very resistant to that concept initially, but it's stuck in my head, and I started to see my own avoidant behavior manifesting even within my relationship initially, right? Because it was my default. And so the women that would come into my world would recognize themselves in my avoidance, right? And so it was just this powerful thing to be able to be seen in that avoidant behavior, because then women were going, "Oh, if you were avoidant and somehow you managed to to work through that. Can you help me do that too?
Now, this segues really nicely into our topic today, which is about conflict, like understanding conflict and conflict resolution. And you had mentioned something about, well, when I was in my life, we never had conflict because it wasn't that we didn't have conflict, we just didn't look at the conflict. So were you also avoiding conflict? Like that was just something that is part of the avoidance, like not only avoiding love but avoiding like the problems that came with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As all of this started to unfold and my understanding of avoidance really expanded, I started to really realize how much avoidance showed up in my life and where it originated from. And and as I rewound back, doing a lot of work, a lot of deep reflection and meditation, I realized that the even though I had a relatively happy, normal childhood by most people's standards, one of the things that happened is that my parents divorced when I was 3, and I never thought that that was that significant as far as I was concerned of my well-being and how I cope in life, right? I was like, I was 3. My parents divorced, I'm fine, right? And what I came to realize over time is that one of the ways that I learned to cope was that 3-year-old version of me saw my mom go through heartbreak and and leave, right? And she went states away. And that said to that little 3-year-old version of me, if something is happening, leave, right? And and I love my mother dearly, right? I hold no ill intent around the choice that she made, and we openly talk about that. But that taught me a certain coping mechanism, right? And so what happened is, as I grew, even as a child, in my home with my dad and then my stepmother, and I had 2 brothers, we didn't navigate conflict at all, right? As far as my family was concerned, nothing was ever happening that was out of the ordinary. Everything was always smooth, and we know that it wasn't, obviously. Right? And the older I get, the more I know that things were happening under the surface. But growing up, nothing was happening. And if something was happening, nothing was happening. And that's how I learned to operate, right? So then, speaking to conflict, if I encountered any conflict, whether it was friendship, whether it was work, school, whatever it was, if saw or felt any resistance, that was bad. Absolutely, I had to go. I had to exit, right? I was taught subconsciously that conflict was bad and was to be avoided at any cost.
Mm, that lands so much. I can resonate with some aspect of that because I had like this disorganized attachment. So in unhealthy relationships, like I would get anxious and want all these things and be all needy. But then in my healthy relationship, the one that I uh the the one that I'm in now, which is my husband and I, we've been together for 15 years. I realized in the early years, I was so avoidant, Lisa. Every little thing that he did wrong that I did not like, I'm gonna leave you. I had set a date too. I said, when we turn 30, I'm gonna divorce you and I'm gonna fight. Like, what kind of person says these things? And I realized, like, because the inconsistency of love in my life, the conflict, my parents didn't have like healthy conflict resolution skills, right? And so it was always fighting, or it was always like one person just giving up. And the other, my mom was the controlling one. So I kind of gained a little bit of insight on how she acted, being the controlling one. Oh, I don't like what you do. I'm just gonna leave you. It's fine. Right. And then he would succumb, just like my dad. He would succumb and say, like, okay, I'll do what you want. Right. And so there was no healthy way to navigate conflict.
Yeah, and this is really what it boils down to, and it's part of what I present with clients, and as you know, I have a group program, and one of the things that we delve into is conflict and how we navigate conflict. And what I've found is so many people don't even know the ways that you navigate conflict. And so I'll share with you kind of the overview of I present 5 ways that people navigate conflict, right? 5. And and all of us fit one of those 5. Some of us multiple, right? And the first type that I present is through accommodation, navigating conflict through accommodation. And when person that accommodates enters into conflict, they go, "Oh, I'm going to let the other person have their way." Right? So in accommodation, one person loses, the person that accommodates loses, and the other person wins, right? That's the first type. The second way that people navigate conflict is what most of us have heard about relationship is compromise. Right? Navigating conflict through compromise. And compromise says one person wins some and loses some, and the other person wins some and loses some, right? And that's what we're presented, right? If you're in a relationship, you got to learn to compromise. Right? And that's just one way to navigate. That's the second way. The third way, you can probably guess, is avoidance. Avoidance. And it may sound counterintuitive, right? But avoidance is a way to navigate conflict. But the thing with avoidance is it's a lose-lose scenario, right? Nobody wins. Right? Because with avoidance, it's saying nothing's happening here. Right? And and so the fourth way is through dominance, which is what you were sharing of how your mom navigate conflict through, I'm going to use my power to get my way. Right? So the person that dominates wins, and the other person loses, right? So it becomes a win-lose. The fifth way, which ironically no one really ever hears about, is actually the way to navigate conflict, and it's through collaboration. And collaboration, everybody wins. The reason that we don't think to collaborate is because collaboration says this is not going to look like what either one of us envisioned. Right? But we get to come together and come up with a new plan where we're both happy.
That's fascinating. The compromise versus collaboration. Can you give an example of what that would look like in each scenario? Because it sounds similar in retrospect, right? But it's
Hmm.
the way that you're presenting is very different. It's a brand new way of looking at us, conflict and resolving it where both parties don't have to
Yeah,
give in any part, and they still get what they want out of it.
absolutely. I'll give a real example. I use my own relationship. Over the summer, last summer, my husband ordered some machines that he needed, and I live in Florida. We live in Florida, and these machines were in Virginia, and he didn't want to ship them because they were delicate, and he said, I want to go get them, like I want to drive and let's pick them up so that we can ensure that they arrive safely. Well, here's the thing, I don't like road trips. I don't like road trips. I had a bad experience, right? So, and so based on this experience that I had many years ago, I don't like road trips. If I can't drive there in less than 2 hours, it's too far. I don't want to drive. Put me on a plane, right? But I knew that driving to Virginia to get these machines was going to mean so much to my husband. And compromise, compromise says, I'll drive because my husband wants to get these machines. So in compromise, quote unquote, I lose and he wins, right? But because it's compromise, the win part is that we get to spend time together, right? It's a compromise. I'm not too happy because I don't want to drive to Virginia, right? But the collaboration, here's where it gets to be a collaboration. The collaboration is that my husband said, you know what? I know that you don't like road trips. So I have this idea. What if we make it into a vacation and you're going to have a spa day? I love a spa day. Right? And so we made it into a vacation, right? It wasn't intended to be that. It was supposed to be, let's go pick up these machines and come back. But collaboration says, my husband goes, my wife doesn't like road trips. So this isn't going to be a road trip. This is going to be a vacation. Right. And so we're both happy. I got a spa day. My husband got his machines. And we had time together and we were both happy.
I love that. So in the end, you did go to pick up the machines with him, and then you had a spa day at the location, or you came back and had a spa day at home?
At the location, we actually, instead of going there and back, we added on 2 days and got a hotel, and one of our a friend of ours has a place by the beach, Virginia Beach. We
Oh,
went, had a beach and spa day. It was beautiful.
I like that. That is very inventive and very like it's a new way of looking at things. Like I wouldn't have envisioned this outcome at all. Like if you were telling the story and you had me guess what happened in the end, I would have never guessed that you had a spa day.
Exactly. That's what collaboration does, right? Collaboration says, I don't look back and think of a road trip, right? That I wasn't looking forward to. When I think of that trip, I think of the spa day that I had. That's what collaboration is.
Now, what are some other conflicts that like you normally see in relationships? Because what comes up in my mind initially is like miscommunication can be like a really big one. You know, you say one thing and you're intending that they're hearing you correctly, and it's completely they're hearing it in their own perspective, in their own way, and it gets completely like miscommunicated. Like
Yeah, yeah. It's so one of and that can go so many directions, right? A lot of what I witness with couples that I work with around conflict is usually one of two scenarios typically. One is around love languages, right? And which seems like we all have heard of love languages, and you ask anyone, they go, "Oh yeah, I know all the love languages," right? And rattle them off. But what happens is most people express love in their own love language, not in the love language that their partner receives, right? So that will start to get the miscommunications rolling, right? Because when a person doesn't receive love in the way that they receive it, they're not open. They're not open to receiving information. And so then it shifts into this. I'll try to keep it brief in in this context, but a lot of the foundation of miscommunications that lead to conflict is around criticism and defensiveness, right? And usually that's not even the intent, right? And I'll share very vulnerably of my own learnings around communication is by default I don't consider myself a defensive person, right? I consider myself pretty open, but when it comes to relationship, that defensiveness comes out in a tricky way. And it comes out from the perspective of having to explain why I did the thing the way I did it, right? And I'll give an example. If my husband likes something a certain way and I do it a different way because that's how I'm accustomed to doing it, right? And he says, "Hey, why did you do this?" Right? Or I want this done a certain way, and I go, well, here's why I did it this way. Right? Here's why. Right? Most of us won't see that as defensive. We're like, oh, I'm just explaining why I did this thing, right? But when it comes to communication, explanations and defensiveness is one of the biggest culprits that leads into conflict, because when your defense mechanism kicks in, usually you didn't acknowledge the person for what they said, right? If my husband says, "You know what? I like the dishes out of the sink before we go to bed," and the dishes aren't out of the sink in the morning, and I go, "Oh, well, the reason why I left the dishes in the sink was because, I had to wake up early and all this." That that's not what his concern was. Right? The concern is to acknowledge the partner.
Mm.
That's usually the foundation of a lot of conflict around communication.
So the acknowledgement piece is a huge part of just saying, like, I hear you that you wanted it this way. And what else do you say after that? Like, I just got sidetracked, or like, I'll make it up to you and I'll actually do it next time, or just like course correcting. So what do you suggest in this case?
Yeah. So what tends to happen is, even if a person acknowledges, they float past it super quick. Right? And here's what gets to happen in this kind of scenario, right? And I'm using obviously myself as an example. If my husband says to me, let's say the next morning, like, "Lisa, it really is important to me that there be no dishes in the sink in the morning," my role as the listener is to say, What I hear you saying is that it's very important that there be no dishes in the sink when you get up in the morning. And here's what gets to happen: I pause and I allow my husband to feel heard for his concern. But what typically happens is a person says, "Oh, I know you want the dishes out of the sink, but here's why they were still in the sink." Right? You hear the quick acknowledgement there, and then go into the here's why. It's what I hear you saying is that it's important for you to have the dishes not be in the sink in the morning when you get up. Wait for the receipt of the acknowledgement, because once the person feels heard, they're going to go, "Yeah," or they're going to relax, or they're going to ask you a question. Then you explain why. Only then, after the person feels heard and lets you know they felt heard. And it sounds simple, right? But we skip over it.
Yeah, I completely like I did just that when I was responding to you. I said, Lisa, what do we do next? Right? Like, what do we do next? Because it's so easy to try to fix the problem that you don't actually listen to
Hmm.
and acknowledge. So that's what acknowledgement really is. It's waiting to like and actually saying, I hear you in this regard.
Yeah, I always say this in such a simple phrase: is seek to understand, not seek to be understood. Right? If you seek to understand, a lot of this stuff that we have issues with falls away.
This is fascinating. So let's say, and this is in the instance that you are in a relationship that you want to make work, right? This is not in the context of like, oh, you're really in an unhealthy relationship and it doesn't work out and it never is going to work out. Or that's really your personal judgment. Whether how much do you want to invest your time into making it work or listening to each other, those kind of things. Um, Now you had mentioned that like it's different when it's two people versus like one person. So can one person change the dynamic of the relationship, or do you feel like it really takes two people to make a difference?
I love this question so much. And I literally get asked this question, I think, every week. Every week a client asks this question. And here's the simple answer: is it only takes one. It only takes one. The complex answer is it takes two. And here's what I mean by that: it only takes one person to create the shift and momentum, but it does take two. Right? Once that momentum is created, once that shift is created, it takes two. And an example of that is when I learned the strategy of how communication works during my master's program. I learned a lot of strategies around communication, and the one strategy I was really drawn to, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try this. And my husband didn't know the strategies I was learning. I sit in my office and study and work with my clients. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try this on my husband. Right? I was like, because if it works with him, I know it works because my husband's a smart guy. He sees through he sees through things, right? And so I decided to do an experiment. And I started using the tool one-sided. So the tool that I learned and that I present to a lot of my clients is the talker listener method. And so what I decided to do is I decided that I would become the best listener I could possibly be without even telling my husband I was using a method, right? I just became an excellent listener because I knew that from my studies, my challenge was defending. Like I said, explaining, right? And when you're explaining yourself, you're not being a good listener. You're not listening at all. You're seeking to be understood, right? So in my pursuit to see if it only took one person, I decided to only seek to understand, which meant I was going to become a really good listener. And here's what happened. I started listening and reflecting back to my husband only what I was hearing from him. I didn't explain myself. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. And I didn't judge. I just shared with him what I would hear him saying. And here's what got to happen. He became a better talker. He became a better talker because I started listening. And now we just openly say, all right, talker listener. Right?
That is fascinating. It reminds me of like when you change, and in energetic terms, it's like you shift your way of being. And equally that energetically resonates to the people around you, and they shift to match the way that you're being. And so that's how you create like resonance, or like how you create that first one person makes the change and then the follow the leader and then the follower. um
Yeah. Yeah. It's the classic, you know, be do have, right? Most people come into relationships, pointing the finger. But the reality is, who do I have to become? Who do I have to become to be the best partner, right? It's not who do they have to become? Who do I have to become? Because if I become the best possible partner and really actually dig into my stuff and become honest, right? And know that when my partner triggers me, it's not my partner's fault, right? My activations are my responsibility, right? And once we can own that, those that are partnered with us who have the best intention, they'll model it too.
mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because that really shows the magic of communication, the magic of listening, and how things that sound very simple can actually make a world of a difference in making your relationship last. Because if you came at it from the way that I used to go at things, goodbye, conflict. No, thank you. Sorry.
I used to do it too.
I say this, what makes my relationship work is that we're both very accommodating people. I promise you, Lisa, like we never fight. And I think that like it's because my husband's, he used to be very accommodating, but like part of the work that I had to do was recognizing, oh, like I have some traits that are not desirable to be actually, like in a healthy relationship. and I had to make that change, and I wouldn't have seen it if I didn't end up in an unhealthy relationship. So like the contrast and the dissonance is what mirrored back to me. Oh my goodness, like this is what is happening in my life and I'm being mirrored back. And how can I take that responsibility and make myself better in order to have the perfect dream relationship, right? Everybody wants the dream relationship, and not enough of us are talking about what gets to happen behind the scenes to make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many misconceptions around what relationship actually is. And that's really to go back to the very beginning when you ask me, what is it that I do? My biggest work is to demystify what it means to be in relationship. That's my biggest work.
And you make it sound like doable, which is really, it's possible. It's
Yeah.
totally possible.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all your wisdom, Lisa. I was going to, I normally ask for like a strategy or a tip or tool, and you had already shared one. Is that the one you want to stand by, or is there another tip or tool that you can share with the audience members today?
Yeah, I'll just really reiterate and make it very simple, even though in theory it's simple. But the one strategy that anyone can implement in relationships, whether it's with a partner or with family, right? Because this applies to all types of relationships, is become the best listener you can possibly be by seeking to understand and not be understood.
Mm, thank you, Lisa, for sharing that with us. And I know you have a free gift for the audience members. Would you be able to share that with us?
Absolutely. It's a heart opening visualization, and it's about an 18-minute visualization that anyone and everyone can do. It doesn't require you to be well versed in meditation. It's a way for you to sit with yourself for a little bit and open your heart. And that is what I offer.
Wonderful. The link will be below this video, so you guys can click on it and access it. I'm so grateful to have you on this masterclass, teaching what you know, and thank you from the bottom of my heart, Lisa, for being here. With that said, I will see everybody in the next masterclass.